Welcome to the show. Tonight, as we go to air, there's a huge standoff at the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. Police in the middle of the night trying to clear violent pro-Palestinian protesters. And we'll have an update on that. But speaking of that, an ABC scandal. We have vile anti-Israel and anti-Jewish protests right here, everywhere really. And how does the ABC respond? Incredibly, with a documentary flattering one of the few Jews stupid enough to blame Israel.
It's being done in my name.
Now, I know that guy, and I'm going to show you why the ABC was even more stupid, making a hero of someone who, in my opinion, is so blind to terrorism. Also tonight, more proof of the uncivilised intolerance of the Greens, this time a New Zealand Green MP physically intimidating another politician in Parliament. I mean, throw this bully child out. Plus, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle plan a royal-style tour of Africa. Have they gone too far? And plenty more. Barnaby Joyce, General Jack Keane, and my whiskey and book of the week. A book every child should read because it sure helped me to watch out for frauds, which I'm going to do again right now. That's how influential this book has been. First, the Prime Minister. And caution, I am about to show again a shocking picture of what this government is doing to Australians. I am astonished by the way the Albanese government tried again today so dishonestly to dodge responsibility for the bashing of 73-year-old Ninette Simons. This is so immoral and it is dangerous. A government that won't own up to mistakes risks, of course, repeating them. Ninette Simons, as I told you last night, she was bashed allegedly by a Kuwaiti man who was one of the 149 criminals the Albanese government freed from immigration detention without proper monitoring or even an ankle bracelet at the end in this guy's case, which Simons still can't understand, as you told Immigration Minister Andrew Giles when he finally called.
I don't feel very safe here anymore, unfortunately. I don't. Why was his ankle bracelet removed in March? He should be safe, but, we feel we've been let down.
Well, today Anthony Albanese was asked about just that. And once again, it was all someone else's fault. This time it was the Community Protection Board that his government set up last year.
The Community Protection Board is, of course, a board that's independent of politicians. It's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases. What bull. I can't comment, but it was their fault. What Albanese actually said, though, that this board is independent from government, it's a total falsehood. Falsehood. These are its members. 4 are actually employed by the government's Department of Home Affairs. And the way it's set up, the Minister, Claire O'Neill, has the final say as well, as her own officials admitted under questioning by Senator James Paterson in February.
Who is the final decision maker under the Migration Act?
The Minister.
The Minister is, right.
On the advice of the board.
On the recommendation of the board.
Yeah, okay,
and the endorsement of the Commissioner.
Right, and so it's not sufficient for the Minister to pass the buck to the Community Safety Board. Ultimately, it's the Minister that makes the call on what conditions apply to people's visas and whether or not applications should be made to the court for a PDO.
No, the board doesn't address the issue of what the Minister should do in relation to a community protection order.
So on a question of, say, should someone wear an ankle bracelet or not, the final decision maker is the Minister, and your evidence is that can be delegated, but no delegated decision has been made on a question like that.
Correct.
Correct.
Now, what the Prime Minister did today is contemptible. He threw his own people under the bus to save his own ministers and himself, where the buck actually really stops. Now, mind you, given what some people on that board are paid to be part-time human shields for this government, I think we can spare them our tears. But let us cut to the chase here. Did this board truly say it was okay to remove the ankle bracelet from this Kuwaiti even after he was dragged in front of a court 3 times for not obeying his curfew and other alleged offences? We don't even know that. But what we do know is that the Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, the Albanese government, had the final say. So these failures are ultimately on them. So when are we going to hear a sorry or see a sacking? But let's now see through another fraud. This is all leading up to my book tip for kids at the end of the show. And you might already have guessed which kids' book or story I'm talking about. To the other fraud. 2 decades ago, the then Labor leader Kevin Rudd told us that global warming was the biggest challenge of our generation. But don't worry, fixing it would cost you next to nothing. In fact, Rudd claimed that Labor's global warming policies back then, its planned cuts to emissions, would cost us each between then and 2045 a total of just $45 per person, or less than $1 every year. I mean, you laugh now, but what a con. Look at the billions the Albanese government is now spending on it every week, it seems now, on global warming schemes. Look at your power bills. You have been hoaxed, of course. Yet the Queensland Labor government last year demanded even tougher cuts to emissions, 75% by 2035. But now that Queensland government faces a huge backlash. In fact, polls say a wipeout at the October election. And Premier Stephen Miles is now desperately trying another con to bribe voters by cutting power bills by $1,000 per household before July. And he's doing that by simply paying people double the existing rebate.
This is the biggest contribution a state has ever made to support households with their energy bills.
Now, it is Miles who is the con man here. You might have thought Rudd, but we'll leave it for another day. Miles. And Queenslanders should see right through him. It's giving money to cut your bills, but where's that money actually coming from? Well, from you, of course. In one pocket, taken from another pocket. So Miles is taking $1,000 from taxpayers to give that same money back to them for the power bills is actually helping to drive through the roof, which is the real problem. And this is how governments hide the true pain caused by global warming schemes. It's madness. Joining me is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, Queensland Premier, is giving Queenslanders $1,000 of their own money to pay for power bills that have gone up by even more. What would you call a scheme like that?
Sort of a backward Ponzi scheme. I'd call it a clear example of what a debacle this current energy policy is. I'd also call into account, if you had questioned Mr Rudd back when he said it was only going to cost $1 or $45 or whatever, if you'd questioned that, they would have called you a denier, not a believer. They would have ridiculed you because the modelling, remember they always come up with the modelling said that this is what would happen. Now you can throw that out the window because reality has walked through the door. The reality is that major manufacturers are running for the door of our nation. Our economy is being driven into the dirt. Pensioners and people who can't afford it are paying through the nose. And even after they get $1,000 of their own money back, okay, what happens to the next power bill and the next and the next? And not one of them has said, I think this is crazy. We better find an alternate way to do this. Because what they're doing to you, they have to give you back $1,000 because they're smashing your budget and making you poor. So you're becoming poorer. And, you know, the kiddies might come home from school and tell you you're going to instantaneously combust and the world's going to end and, you know, give you a sense of guilt. But the reality is that on the path to assuaging their guilt, you become a very poor, miserable person.
Honestly, the whole thing is so stupid. Taking $1,000 from you and giving it back to you, and you're supposed to feel that your power bills are going down. Have you had a look at your taxes? Barnaby, last night I mentioned 2 Greens councils in Victoria, Monash Council they were with. They quit the Greens, saying there was too much bullying, too much intolerance, too many demands that everyone in the Greens must think alike. This will shock you, I know. Tonight I have another example of Greens intolerance, and I'm sad to say, Barnaby, it comes from where your father was born, New Zealand. It's Green MP Julianne Gentner, American-born, getting up in Parliament and screaming in the face of an MP she disagreed with. Here she is.
The Roxroad project, which has been your seat. Okay, we're just going to have some order here.
Genter out. What is it with the Greens, Barnaby?
But Andrew, they're the party of peace. They're enlightened. They're enlightened. They're just so frustrated that you're not enlightened like them. And sometimes it's just going to scream in your face and tell you that. You know, this is what happens. The idea of the Greens or the party of, Bob Brown and the rainforests and that, it's not. It's a political party, a far left-wing political party that runs under the banner of Green. But, any crazy socialist sort of neo-communist cause, the Greens' fingers are all over it. And if you disagree with them, if you're not a believer, if you're a denier, you are absolute. The venom that oozes out of them. Well, you don't have to be in New Zealand to see that.
But Barnaby, I think you might be a little unfair. It could be that this Miss Genter actually thought that MP was hard of hearing, and that if she went right up to him and screamed at him, he might finally hear. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm trying to be kind here. I'm known for being kind and generous. Barnaby, but about the Greens' intolerance and their bullying, I am really shocked that Deputy Greens leader Mehreen Faruqi, we're talking the Australian Greens now, she's taken One Nation leader Pauline Hanson to court this week, bleeding her dry with legal costs. And this is over Hanson's response to this social media post by Faruqi on the death of the Queen. I cannot mourn the leader of a racist empire built on the stolen lives, land and wealth of colonised people, which is a falsehood I'll get into later in the show. Hanson's response was, pack your bags and pee off back to Pakistan. Faruqi claims that travel advice is supposedly racist. Does it concern you that one politician is taking another to court over something like this? Something, in my opinion, so trivial in response to a very provocative and offensive post.
Well, I think people should see what Ms. Faruqi has said about me in the past. I possibly have grounds to take her. If that's grounds for Pauline Hanson to go to court and her to take Pauline Hanson to court, then I think some of the comments she made about me means that possibly I've got grounds to take her to court. But you don't. This sort of legalistic, litigious form. This is the crazy sort of juxtaposition, the irony or the cynicism we have for the Greens, that we've got one screaming in the face of a politician, and that's A-OK, and the other one who gets a comment in the chamber and wants to go for defamation. It's the hypocrisy of it. It just screams hypocrisy. But see, you always get sucked into, you think, they're all right. There's a nice side. There's a benevolent side. If I move closer to them, they'll move closer to me. That's never how they work. As you move to the Greens move away. And they just ratchet you off to insanity, the left and communism. That's where you're heading to. And they do it under, well, we like koala bears.
Yeah, look, I don't know why people fall for this. They don't see the meanness and the intolerance under the supposed cuddliness. I don't get it. Barnaby Joyce, thank you so much for your time. Well, I have to say, let's just cross to the amazing scenes of the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. So they've had an encampment there. These are live pictures. They've had an encampment there for weeks now, very hostile to students that are Jewish or at least pro-Israel, which most would be. Very nasty scenes there. I'll have some examples later. The police have withdrawn from that encampment that students illegally put up. There were other students, pro-Jewish or pro-Israel, that knocked down barriers to get in there. So it's all very tense. I mean, to think that this is the hill they're dying on, the destruction of Israel is apparently what they want. Unbelievable. It's just 2 a.m., just gone 2 a.m. in Los Angeles. We'll talk more about that later. But after the break, we've now got even toddlers trained to call for Israel to be destroyed. I mean, what is happening to this country? Which is why I think the ABC on Sunday is about to show one of the most stupid documentaries it has commissioned in years. A hero documentary about a man I regard as a fool, and now a dangerous one. let me interrupt my own show to protest against this madness around us. I mean, the ABC, totally out of control. It is about to make a hero of one of the most unworthy Australians I can think of at this precise time when Jews in Australia have never been so scared. Now, I played you last night, organisers of a student occupation at the Australian National University, telling the ABC they really supported the Hamas terrorists who started this war by invading Israel on October 7, you know, slaughtering 1,200 people, mostly civilians, raping women, beheading and kidnapping people.
You've also got to send a message to Hamas to release the hostages, don't you?
Well, I actually say that Hamas deserve our unconditional support, not because I agree with their strategy.
You can't condemn what Hamas did in October last year?
I will not condemn what Hamas did. We must be unconditional, but we must be critical also,
Luke?
right?
No, I did not condemn.
Now, Sky News reporter Carolyn Marcus has even uncovered footage now of children, even toddlers, at a protest outside Greater Dandenong Council being taught to call for intifada, armed resistance, and the total destruction of Israel, a country of 7 million Jews.
From the river, sea, Palestine, free.
Now, in response to all this, apologists say, oh, no, these protests aren't really anti-Jewish, they're anti-Zionist. Just anti-Jews who believe in Israel's right to live. And to hide their implicitly anti-Jewish agenda, they say, but look, I mean, you know, there's a Jew who also hates Zionists or Israel. Jews like Anthony Lowenstein. Anthony Lowenstein, who on Sunday will star in a new documentary on the ABC, which this little-known freelance journalist says will be about Jewish dissent against Israel, about my life and work, my journalism, family background, Jewish history, 7 October, mass slaughter in Gaza, and the global surge in Jewish identity infused with support for Palestine. Here's the teaser.
Seeing what has happened to Gaza since October 7 has been heartbreaking. I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed because it's being done in my name.
Which is odd. You know, I've been to Israel during this war. I've talked to Israeli politicians and generals, and not one has said they were doing this for Anthony or Antony. Not one. They've said they're doing it for Israel, but not for Antony, I tell you. So you might have already gathered that this guy's tickets on himself. Now I want to know why, of all the Jews in the country, the ABC picked this guy, elected by nobody, representing nobody, to give a hero's platform. And when you go through this guy's history, that may actually become clear. Because Lowenstein's shtick has been to get applause and the odd gig, you know, for always blaming Israel and cheering its destruction. He's been, for instance, 100% in support of a boycott against Israel. He's co-written a book that echoes a key demand of Hamas: no separate state of Israel. The Jews must be part of one state, which of course means being outnumbered by Muslims, including the many Hamas supporters who've already shown they want Jews dead. Now, we are not talking here about a great thinker, because this guy wrote a book slamming Israel, a book so shoddy that even a reviewer in the left-wing Sydney Morning Herald pandered. He said Lowenstein's basic argument is that Israel is primarily, if not solely, responsible for the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Israel is described as rapacious, intransigent and aggressive apartheid state, pursuing colonial and murderous policies, while Israelis are stereotyped as intolerant, racist and callous, which sounds to me a bit like what a Hamas Jew hater would also say. I mean, this is an ideologue so blind that his reaction to the slaughter of 3,000 Americans by al-Qaeda terrorists on September 11 was to write that September 11 should have been the perfect opportunity for the Western media to hear the grievances of the Muslim world, sit down and talk to them. Now, if you think, well, Jews against Israel, they must have special insight, special courage. I mean, going against the crowd like this. Well, I think we've actually seen their type before. This is Max Naumann. He was also dead against Zionism. He was the chairman of the Association of German National Jews and demanded that Jews simply assimilate into Germany and urged Germans to vote for Hitler. Vote for the ultimate Jew hater. And he blames Zionists for causing the trouble. Oh, the poor trouble they were causing, the Nazis. And blamed Eastern Jews for being so hard to assimilate. Well, Naumann, of course, got his reward from the Nazis. He was tossed into a concentration camp. Anthony Lowenstein, presented to us by the ABC as a hero at a time when fellow Jews need defending, when this anti-Jewish poison around us needs challenging, not rationalised in the eyes of some as the fault of Israel or the Jews. I mean, seriously, what is the ABC up to? I think we know. Joining me is the panel, James McPherson and Liz Storer, both at the Late Debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. I mean, James, a document on this guy. Why, of all the Jews in Australia, is this the one who right now gets the ABC love, the ABC platform?
It's funny, isn't it, Andrew? Because the ABC hate tokenism. I mean, tokenism equals racism. But next minute, they drag out a fringe extremist Jew with anti-Israel views that echo their own and present him as the real Jew. So it's a clear case of bias. The anti-Semitism we've seen in this country is the biggest and most disturbing story we've seen in a number of years, and yet it's hardly been covered at all in any meaningful way by our national broadcaster. In fact, they've gone the other way. It was only a few months ago that they were promoting a story on their TikTok channel about Australian companies boycotting Israel, and they didn't have any dissenting voice at all. This boycott was presented as, quote, a powerful and effective measure. And so this goes beyond anti-Israel bias. This is actually anti-Israel activism on behalf of the national broadcaster. So the instance you've just alluded to is sadly very much on point for the ABC.
Yeah, they're not going to give half an hour to Colin Rubinstein of AJAC or, anyone from the Australian Jewish Association, like a good friend David Adler. They won't do that. It's got to be this guy who represents no one. Liz, what do you make of it?
This guy has literally made a lot of money out of what I would call Jew hatred, Andrew. His latest book, which was published just last year, is called The Palestine Laboratory, How Israel Exports the Technology of Occupation. He's got several other books, some entitled Disaster Capitalism. He is a nutshell lefty, that's for sure. And of all the times to give this guy a platform on the national broadcaster, when we're seeing such a lack of social cohesion here in Australia, it really does strip the ABC bare of any farce that they were playing at in terms of just presenting the facts. When Kim Williams took this job, in fact, as recently as last month, he told ABC journos either be measured or leave, and yet would choose to give such a set piece to a man such as this. Not a journo for the ABC, but that's who they are lending their ginormous and nationwide platform to at a time like this. But as James has already said, this is quite consistent for the ABC. Let's all remember it was just last December that they fired somebody on their own payroll because Antoinette Latouth had shared pro-Palestinian posts on her social media. Well, yes, but she'd also shared such content before they'd hired her. But yet the ABC wants us to believe that they just didn't know at the time.
They didn't know. Honestly, you're so cynical for one so young, but they didn't know, Liz. They didn't know. Oh, such bull. You said Anthony Lowenstein, made from what you call Jew hating. I wouldn't say that Jew hating at all. He would say, I am a Jew. How could I hate myself? How could I hate my parents? That's not so. I just think he's a useful idiot. A useful idiot being exploited by Jew haters and presenting arguments that might make them think this serves their agenda. That's, I think, the real issue here. You mentioned Kim Williams. He used to he's the chairman of the ABC. He used to be a composer working with Israel Symphony Orchestra. This must cut right to the bone for him, I would have imagined. But James, amazing data from the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. The number of students identifying as neither male nor female has shot up by 20-fold since the pandemic. 2,500 students last year enrolled as non-binary compared to just 128 only 5 years ago. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me, Andrew, there's a deliberate and concerted effort around the Western world to confuse young people about their gender. Time magazine recently published a study of more than 1 million Americans and found that less than 1% of boomers identified as something other than male or female, but almost 6% of Gen Z young people identified as such. And of course, there's no such thing as non-binary. You're either male or female. You can't be somewhere in the middle. But this is a concerted effort by a small but powerful group who believe that their own sexual orientation is their entire identity and indeed their world. So what do you do if you're that kind of person to feel comfortable? You try to sexualise every part of the culture. You begin with young people. We're seeing it in Hollywood. Disney recently boasted that 50% of their main characters from this point going forward would be LGBTQ characters. Pixar last year announced they were introducing their first ever non-binary character. They said this was historic. Sporting organisations. I mean, if you come out as non-binary, you'll get more publicity and more favourable publicity than if you win a gold medal. Politicians will fawn over you if you identify as something other than male or female. The education system is now designed to promote this. Our politicians celebrate it with flags, left, right and centre. And what's interesting, Andrew, about this study, it's about 2,500 young people in this country who say they're non-binary. And what has the Education Department decided to do? In response to a tiny group of young people who are not non-binary, they're gender confused, the Education Department have said, let's get rid of terms like boy and girl, let's get rid of terms like mum and dad and use gender-neutral language, which is nothing more than a concerted effort to inspire even more confusion. We are getting what certain groups and powerful lobby groups have wanted. We're getting confused kids. It's not by accident, it's by design.
Look, look, there may well be people generally non-binary, but I suspect a lot of it's to do with a coolness. I noted one American study suggested that a lot of the women, particularly saying they were non-binary, still only exclusively dated men. So I don't know what that means. Liz, what's your take on this?
It is social contagion, Andrew, and we're seeing this across the Western world. The East is busy with more pressing matters, but the Western world is seeing this massive increase. ACAR, who recently released this stat that you've just referred to, says that the actual number is higher than over 2,500 because, of course, not all schools register those students that do consider themselves non-binary, and so they weren't able to supply ACAR with their numbers when they were putting this together. But what we are seeing is social contagion here, and there has been many studies done now on the effect of social media with regard to championing this LGBTIQ indoctrination. And it's interesting that we've seen this extraordinary jump from what you just said, 190 to over 2,500 in a matter of a couple of years, when those are particular years that at times kids weren't even going to school. They were at home a lot more on their devices, being awash with this kind of indoctrination. And what's interesting is schools, rather than being like, OK, we have to come up with a comprehensive plan here, have simply gone, it's not just the language that they're changing, which James has talked about already, but it's gender-neutral bathrooms now, gender-neutral sports, the way that this is affecting schools across the board, and therefore other kids being confused by those who identify this way.
What it is, it's like build a field and they will come. Build a gender-neutral toilets and they will come. There you go, Liz Thorah. Well, it is indeed. Liz Thorah, James McPherson, thank you both for your time. After the break, one of America's top generals on these discussing protests at America's universities and why we should worry about China's latest attack on Coast Guard ships of the Philippines. Now, one good thing about these anti-Israel and anti-Jewish protests, it's the chance for people of character, of courage to reveal themselves. I mean, like these two students. One never letting go of his book, full marks for that, who defied the anti-Israel mob at New York's Columbia University, insisting on their right to be at their university.
Ready? Circle blockade around these three. We're going to move them out.
Now, they stood tall against that mob surrounding them and pushing them when many politicians and university bosses do not. In America, in Australia. Meanwhile, at the University of California, Los Angeles, as I showed you earlier, some pictures there, the anti-Israel mob actually set up checkpoints before they were cleared out to stop Jewish students like the one filming this from getting to their own library. Now, when the university bosses would not protect them, a group of students attacked the anti-Israel and anti-Jewish protest camp at the UCLA and tried to tear down the barricades. The anti-Israelis fought back. It got quite violent. Police refused to intervene for 2 hours.
Where are the cops?
Should we just put it down?
Should we call 911?
Exactly, that's my best.
Where are the cops?
Now, they've now been cleared out, finally, that the violence shamed the authorities. But around America, anti-Israel protesters are even now occupying universities, many chanting for the destruction of Israel, as are students at our own. Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired four-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, thank you so much for joining me. The footage today from these protests, particularly UCLA, but the last week, Columbia and all those others, it's just so shocking. Violence now at UCLA, where anti-Israel protesters had even been blocking Jewish students from going to the library. This is a terrible indictment of American universities, let alone our own, I must say.
Yeah, it certainly is. And we have a lot of the staff and faculty are also supporting these students. It's incredibly outrageous behavior when you consider the safety of Jewish students is on the line here, and the very ability for a university to function, and that the feckless leadership that some of these university presidents have shown is really profoundly disappointing. Some others certainly have taken the appropriate action and made certain that the protesters are removed from interfering with the functioning of the university and making certain also that their students are safe. And this behavior should be held accountable not only by the police if it's violating the law, but by the university in terms of expelling those who are demonstrating this kind of behavior. And it's also outrageous that people are just openly supporting Hamas, who is a genocidal organization that's determined to destroy the state of Israel and would take and kill as many Jews as they possibly could. That is manifestly inappropriate behavior to ever be supporting an organization like that. I'm stunned by people who are educated, informed, making judgments like that. It's just disgusting.
Well, I think it reflects a wider cultural drift, General. I've got to say, I noticed that your former alma mater, a Jesuit school, they didn't give much shrift to the protesters. It's the more secular ones that have been absolutely captured by this, with the academics actually joining some of these protesters. But listen, this is they're ostensibly about the war between Israel and the Hamas terrorist group. I say ostensibly, it's mainly role-playing if you ask me. Let's look at that. Israel's negotiating a ceasefire now with Hamas, supposedly, but it seems Hamas is refusing to release all its hostages, probably because it's killed a lot of them. Meanwhile, Israel, despite that, is still planning a land assault on Rafah, which is the last remaining city in Gaza that it has not yet searched for the hostages and for the Hamas commanders. What's your take on what's going on there?
Yeah, well, first of all, what's on the table is another proposal, in terms of a temporary ceasefire and release of somewhere between 20 to 33 hostages, about a 40-day ceasefire, with the ability to release the Palestinians to go back into northern Gaza, something that Hamas is interested in. Hamas has been opposing these proposals for some time now. And the reality is they have put some very harsh conditions on the table: permanent ceasefire, withdrawal of all troops, and then begin negotiations over the hostage release. And the intensity and these conditions by Hamas have gotten tougher, I believe, quite related to the Biden administration's pushback on Israel publicly and fundamentally disagreeing with their military operation in Rafah as well. And that has certainly undermined Israel quite significantly in these negotiations, and certainly has strengthened Hamas's position. I'm hopeful that something will come of these recent proposals so that more of these hostages could be released. And I certainly underscore Israel's determination to continue their military operation in Rafah after they move many of the civilians to a safe enclave, because the destruction of Hamas, as much as they can possibly do, is absolutely essential. And that is where the leaders are. And my sources tell me that Sinwar, who is the #1 leader in Gaza of the Hamas organization, has 15 to 20 hostages protecting him and his family in the tunnel complex. And that's why they have these hostages, to guarantee their survival. Certainly, so they'll be able to go forward. And Israel is absolutely right in putting military pressure on them to force the release of the hostages.
General, from the start, you have warned, and I think you're absolutely correct, that these wars are precursors. If the West does not stand up in Israel, if it does not stand up in Ukraine, China is going to take note and will be encouraged to invade Taiwan and take that back. It's watching. Meanwhile, we are seeing more evidence of China's aggression, its stealing of territory. You've seen Chinese warships once again attack the Coast Guard of the Philippines in waters it has stolen, the South China Sea, bombarding it with water cannons, the ships, etc., etc. How serious is this latest offensive attack?
Well, China is very frustrated with the Philippines ever since the administration changed hands from Duarte to Marcos. And when Marcos took over, he immediately reached out to the United States and has aligned himself with the United States, so much so that they provided the United States access to 4 of their military bases. Quite amazing. 3 of those are very close to Taiwan, and that has infuriated the Chinese because it's been such a flip from the previous administration, which was somewhat pro-China here, to what has taken place. And that is why you see this anger that they have being carried out, certainly by military intimidation of the Philippines. I wish the United States was speaking out even stronger about this than what they are doing. But nonetheless, our admiration for the Philippines, for holding their own here and for not giving into it. And listen, there is progress being made with allies and partners in the region. And certainly what Japan is doing with almost doubling their defense budget and making certain that they're going to step up if something does happen in the region is commendable. President Xi has not given up on any of his goals despite the internal challenges he has. Dominate and control the Indo-Pacific region, replace the United States as the world's global leader. He is about that business every single day, and we have got to be firm in dealing with him and also continuing to educate our body politics so that people understand the threat that's being imposed on us, and we get the kind of defense budgets that are necessary to upgrade our capabilities in the region.
General Jack Keane, thank you so much for your time.
Great talking to you, Andrew, as always.
To the break. Controversy as Harry and Meghan Markle plan a royal tour of Nigeria. And my book of the week, one you should read to every child to make them see through the frauds that today seem all around us. All that after this. Prince Harry and wife Meghan Markle are off to Africa later this month, to Nigeria this time, and their critics are really saying, hang on here, this is being made to look like a royal tour, exploiting their royal status when they don't actually do the real work. Joining me from London is Patrick Christie, star presenter at GB News. Patrick, always great to talk to you. Hey, what are they doing and why is it a problem?
Well, Meghan has done an ancestry test and found out that she's 43% Nigerian, so she's decided to go and embrace her roots, apparently, Andrew. It's a shame she didn't find out she was 43% Antarctic, because then she'd have to go there, wouldn't she? But they say this is for the Invictus Games and for cultural experiences, but I think this is all about one thing. It's content for Netflix, okay? It could even be argued by some that they might be using impoverished Africans for their own personal gain. You compare and contrast the way that the king is going about his business. He's surviving cancer. He's been to a cancer treatment centre. They've also got a lot of land in this country, the royal family. They're talking about using that for affordable housing. William's doing a lot with food waste, but really now Harry and Meghan are going around Nigeria. I think also it's about one-upping William and Kate. William and Kate had quite a disastrous tour of the Caribbean a few years back. I wonder if they are trying to essentially create a different ambiance here. When they left the royal family, they made a big virtue out of the fact that because of Meghan's cultural heritage, she would have been a great ambassador to the Commonwealth. And I think that now they are dining out on that former royal link to go and do that.
Well, speaking of Africa, Patrick, your government has tried for months, probably years, I think now, to get a scheme that's like ours, to deter illegal immigrants, boat people, by sending them to another country. You, or your government, wants to send them to Rwanda in Africa, which is actually a pretty place when I visited it. Tragic history, pretty place. Finally, one person has now been sent. Are you celebrating? Is that party streamers I see behind you?
Well, not quite, because that person didn't come across on a small boat and we did have to pay him £3,000 to go there. But there are actually some clauses for celebration, okay? So Rwanda is a deterrent. We are now interviewing people when they land on these small boats in Britain and breaking the news to them that they could be sent to Rwanda, and quite a lot of them want to turn the boat around and go back the other way. So that's a good sign. The other aspects of it is the island, the Republic of Ireland, which has a land border with the UK, of course, has messed around with us, and now they're in the finding out stage because they offered illegal immigrants a better deal. They offered them more money and the opportunity to go and work. They also declared the United Kingdom an unsafe country, so they couldn't return people. Well, what's happened? Their population has grown by about 40% in the last 20 years. More rapidly, more recently, communities have been destroyed. There's a huge welfare state. They've got tent cities now of illegal migrants in Dublin and mass outrage. And now they want to send people back to us, but they're saying the influx is because of Rwanda, which does imply it's working. Just quickly as well, Andrew, we've got a very similar situation in this country to the one that you guys had, which is where our Labour Party is saying we would get rid of this Rwanda scheme. But now the noises are, actually, if it works, which it could, then they wouldn't reverse it. I think you guys have heard that before, haven't you?
We sure have. We sure have. We have a Prime Minister who said he couldn't possibly turn the boats back. We put the people on unsinkable boats and sent them back. And now apparently he can. How about that? Hallelujah. Hey, Patrick, earlier in the show I mentioned Greens deputy leader here, Mehreen Faruqi, saying, posting, she couldn't mourn the Queen's death because here's someone who built a country, an empire or whatever, on the back of slavery and all that kind of thing. Well, I've interviewed a historian of colonialism who's written a fascinating book arguing that it did not make the West rich at all. It was a net cost. And activists claiming, though, their wealth, the West built their wealth by robbing them are wrong. Now, Britain's Institute of Economic Affairs has said in a new study, slavery did not make the West rich either, just made a few wealthy families rich. Tell us about it and why it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, Britain may have actually been made poorer by the slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade was no more important to the British economy than brewing or sheep farming. We don't usually hear that brewing financed the Industrial Revolution, do we? Or that sheep farming is responsible for all the evils in the world. About 100 families in Britain were made wealthier by the slave trade. Hilariously, one of their descendants now works for the BBC, so she can pay reparations if she wants, but the rest of us, I don't think, should have to. It's important for two things here. Britain was not built off the back of slavery, and we need to stop that idea. The other thing is that we need to stop telling children that in schools. So we need to stop being ashamed of our nationality and our national history. That's important. But also you've got very woke religious leaders like Archbishop Justin Welby from the Church of England talking about £1 billion worth of reparations. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this report, as it says, people who are actually responsible for the slave trade at source probably benefited much better than the average Brit. So you have to take that into consideration. No taxpayers' money for reparations, Andrew.
Yeah, slavery is appalling, but I have to say, why don't they go after the African tribes that helped the slave trades by capturing the slaves that they traded in the first place? So that'd be interesting. A few wealthy Nigerian families might be quaking in their boots at that. And so they should.
I mean, maybe Meghan can meet them. Maybe Meghan can meet them.
Well, I tell you what, that is the one hitch that could come out of that tour. They could do the big, we should be sorry for slavery and colonialism, reparations now, when they know they don't have to bear any responsibility for paying it. You wait. I bet you that's the trick in this particular tour.
Yeah, quite possibly. Well, all eyes will be on Nigeria for Meghan and Harry, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely right. Patrick Christie, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Well, to take it from me, right. Well, whiskey and book of the week. Well, the book of the week, I've been thinking about this for ages. You won't probably have guessed, or you may have guessed it. Oh, this is my battered copy, very battered. Hans Christian Andersen, his Tales for Children. And I'm thinking, looking at the children now, or the young, who are so ripe to fall for any scare with global warming or whatever, they need to read Hans Christian Andersen. The guy's Danish, born in 1805, stories translated, fables, about 125 languages I read. It's so much part of our thinking in the West, or it was. You just think of the titles: The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid, The Princess and the Pea, The Snow Queen, The Ugly Duckling, The Little Match Girl, Thumbelina. You get it, right? Now, about The Ugly Duckling, his father, Hans Christian Andersen, thought, oh, we're related to the king. They weren't, right? And he himself was, to be honest, on the ugly side. So you can imagine The Ugly Duckling. He actually said that was a story based a little bit on his own life, where here's an ugly duckling, turns out it grows into a magnificent swan. And Hans Christian Andersen fancies himself as a bit of the swan. Although when he went to stay with Charles Dickens wanted him out of his house as soon as possible. Rude, not house trained. But the story that I recommend, Emperor's New Clothes. Big impact on me. You remember the story? Taylor said, here's new clothes, so fine a material that only the stupid would think that you didn't have any clothes. You were stark naked. So everyone said, I don't want to be stupid. Beautiful clothes. Until a boy who wasn't in on the game said, that's wrong. That's wrong. You're naked. End of great story. You think of Bruce Pascoe. You think of the global warming crisis, the emergency. You think of the people saying, Hamas, they're great freedom fighters. If only they had read Emperor's New Clothes. As always, go to buy it. Robinson's Bookstore. Make sure that one's part of the one of the stories in the book you select. The one that I've shown is one of them. There you go. And the whiskey of the week is Jura whiskey. Very different than normal. It's a bit smoky, all that, rich. I like it because malt whiskies tells a tale. On the island of Jura, George Earl was there, only 200 people there. Most of the people on that island rely on you drinking this lovely whiskey. That's it from me. Up next is Danica Di Giorgio, filling in for Sherry. Good night.